Welcome to the Providence College podcast. The early June anniversary of the Allied invasion of Normandy turns our attention to World War II. In that context, we are pleased to present an encore presentation of last fall's conversation with Joseph DeStefano, a member of the class of 1952. Mr. DeStefano saw duty in the Pacific during the war, then enrolled at PC, launching a career in education. We hope you enjoy Matt Chittum's conversation with Joseph DeStefano.
Hello and welcome to the Providence College podcast. I'm your host, Matt Chittum, and I'm joined, as always, by PC producer and videographer Chris Judge, class of 05. Here at the Providence College podcast, it's our job to bring you interesting stories from inside the Fryer family. And today we have a very special guest. We are joined by Joseph DeStefano, class of 1952. Joe served in the U.S. Army's Navy Division, serving in the Pacific during World War II from 1943 to 1946. He also worked for 35 years in the Providence School Department before retiring in 1992 as the principal of Central High School. He was the 2002 National Alumni Award winner at Providence College after playing basketball and baseball at PC. At the Narragansett Council of Boy Scouts of America, he worked for over 25 years, including as executive board member and district chairman. Joe, this is long. I'm just going to keep going. National Catholic Committee on Scouting, national vice chairman for 13 years, and an executive board member, chairman for 6 years, the Diocese of Providence, father of 6, grandfather of 15. Joe, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Well, we're going to be putting this podcast out just before Veterans Day, and I want to get started with that topic. As a veteran yourself, on that day, what is the first thing that comes to mind for you, and what are some of the things that you think about on Veterans Day?
Well, what I think about is when I first was inducted into the Army, and I was 18, just over 18 years old, and I think I'd been as far as maybe to the World's Fair in New York, and Pawtucket maybe, and then here I am finding myself going, landing in one part in New Guinea where someone put a sign up there that says Los Angeles 25,000 miles, and looking at one another and say, well, I don't think we're going to get back there, it's so far. So, but the experience was, I think everyone should be going into the service after high school, just to get the responsibility and learning a little about life, and then go on to college.
And for you, you grew up in this neighborhood. We're currently about 4 streets away from Harkins Hall. And so you were mentioning before that you've kind of lived in this neighborhood outside of your Army experience almost your whole life.
Oh, yes. Every morning when I went to Mount Pleasant High School on my way, I'd go walk through the college. And that's when the winter was 15 degrees and walking through, and it was windy. And I used to watch the PC football team practice. And the baseball, when they were playing, the Red Sox used to come down and play the PC baseball team.
That doesn't sound like a very fair game.
But it was an experience. It was fun,
So you mentioned just now how much of how valuable your Army experience was, and that you think it would be beneficial to anybody after they graduate high school. So for you, kind of going back in time, did you have that same view of entering the Army when you were 17 or 18 years old, or what was your outlook prior to the war?
Well, it's like everything else. You read the news and you discuss it, with your friends as much as you can. But there isn't much you can do. It's just go to school and work with your subjects and so forth. But it's a different story when you're in the service. You got to do what you're told. I mean, there's no question on that. And it got me to be more disciplined, more, let's say, listening, and then reacting.
And what were some of your traits in that regard prior to entering the Army? How would you describe yourself prior to enrolling or enlisting?
Well, I was always an active young man. I always played baseball. I played in the Melrose League when they had those leagues in in Providence. They had several leagues at that time, and there was not much going on, activities to take other people as it is today. And they had leagues there with the Melrose and up until the Providence Amateur League, where the top players played. And so I started out in the lower level and worked up. So that was a goal, and you just strive for it.
And what does, you mentioned earlier that you were in the Navy, kind of the Navy division of the Army. So what exactly does that mean? What were some of the roles and responsibilities that you had during the war?
Well, we were a support group. We'd go in after the invasion. And I was an LCM operator. I operated, myself, and I had a crew of 2 people. And it was I don't know if you know what the LCM is. The LCM is one of those steel, 55-foot steel, I will call them boats. And you can put a 2.5-ton truck right on it, loaded, or you can put soldiers in it. And it's got a big, the front end drops down, and you just can enter to get onto the land just walking off the what do you call it, the ramp there. And so that was done in the Pacific. So the Army needed something to go from island to island too. And that's what we used to do.
And what was the scope? Like what was the scope of the islands that you were covering?
Well, we started off at when we left San Francisco. We were heading for the Asia Pacific, and one of the things that happened as we're going along, and about the 3rd day out, about midnight. Now we were drilled on the ship. You'd go for you're trained to get off the ship or go for when it's in danger or something. Well, the alarm went off, and one of the things when you went to sleep, you rolled up your stuff in a roll, and they used that as a pillow. So if that alarm went off, you just took it and went up the stairs and got up on top. And this time we didn't know what could happen, but the alarm went off. It was around just about midnight, and come to find out, a ship coming back from a Liberty ship coming back, hit us, ran right into us. And the only thing that saved us was it hit the superstructure of the ship. And it demolished the whole section of the bow, and the boat was idling. And so all of a sudden, lights went all around us with all Liberty ships and destroyers that were in the area. And I guess the message went out. So the captain of the ship there kept giving us information on what's going on. And it took us 2.5 days to get to New Hebrides Island. And when we got off the boat, we looked, and the whole front of the boat was a whole huge hole. And we looked at it, and what saved us was it hit the main part of the building, of the ship. It's where the pilot house is and all that. So it's the strongest part. But it had been about 10 feet to either to the bow or to the rear end of the ship there would have split us right in half.
So you were still able to stay on the ship for 2 days after that event?
Yeah. We were on the ship, and we stayed up on top. And the only time we went down inside was when we went to mess. And talking about fear, it seems like there was almost 5,000 troops on this ship. It wasn't small. It was the USS Chapara. It was a Dutch ship that they had rented from the Dutch or whatever. And we always found ourselves against the wall of where the danger was in the front of it, so the wall was all wet and it caused some sweat. And I remember we're all sitting down, if they were just like this, sitting at the table, rather than sitting this way. We were sitting the other way, backwards, and whatnot, and just turning around and trying to get our food and getting the heck out of there. And but thank God that we got to New Hebrides, and it took them several days, about 14, 15 days to patch it up. And then we headed for where we were going, to New Guinea. And we got to Finch Haven. That was our first stop. And they had just made an invasion there, and there's still fighting going on there. And we stayed there for, 3 or 4 or 5 weeks. And then we moved up to Oro Bay, and little by little we waked up and up until we got up to the island of Biak. So we were sort of supporting the units after the invasion.
So you were fighting the Japanese in the Pacific?
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. We, because to see what the procedures they were using in the Pacific was different than in Europe because of all the islands in the Pacific. And the Japanese really had secured all those islands. You can't believe the defense that they put up there. A lot of those mountains had caves in them that they were living in them, and doing all that battles and with the ammunition and all that, the firing. And so they had to be defeated. And once they got control of the island, the Americans got control of the island, then they would go on to the next, not that same unit, but they would attack another island, and they would do the, cut the island off from getting supplies. So these little by little, the Japanese were giving up. So, and just in Hollandia alone, in New Guinea, there was a major battle went on there even after 43, 44. So those battles, even after they took the islands, there was a lot of fighting still going on. And they got up into getting closer and closer to Japan, and with, Iwo Jima and the rest of them, and Guam and whatnot. So, and eventually, it's the only way they could have done that. Otherwise, we'd have been there for years trying to conquer the Japanese. And then, then what happened, then they bombed Japan, and that kind of brought it to an end.
So how did your experience in the Pacific align with what your expectations were going in? Did you feel like you had did it match your expectations, or was it kind of more violent, or just what was your sense going in versus the actual reality for you?
Well, you had to do what you had to do. I mean, you do what you're told to do, and you don't think about it. You just you were given an order and you follow it. You can't argue with the captain or whoever's giving the order out, and so you do it. That's it.
Right. So how did that? You mentioned before the value that sort of dynamic, how it affected your life from a discipline standpoint. Once you left the Army. So how were you able to use that in some of your next ventures, whether that's with the Boy Scouts or from a teaching perspective or any other area of your life?
Well, I was always a good listener. And my feeling is that anyone, I don't care what position they have, and you have to be a good listener to begin with. Then you take it off from there. See? So that world you're dealing with and so forth, at least that's what I used at school. I listened to the students and you let them talk. And a lot of times when I was assistant principal, a student would come in, for discipline, and I would hand the teacher's report to them, a copy of them. Well, I have a copy. I let them read it. Right? And they read it down. I said, now, Tommy, this teacher took what time to put those 5 items down on this here? Do you think she was kidding? Did you do just one of those things? And they'll look at you and say, well, yeah, Mr. D, I probably did. Yeah, I probably did this here. Oh, yeah, well, that happened, yeah. So, in other words, gave them the feeling to speak, And then we'd take whatever discipline I had to hand out when he had to go back after school, but we'd get the problem straightened out. But that's the way I operate it, and that's why it's listening, And if you're not a good listener, I don't think, to me, you can't be a good leader. You got to listen, and then do what you have to do, but show people that you're going to listen to them. And I did that with a lot of parents, so let them talk, whether it was negative or positive or whatever. And then you let them get their view off, and then you deal with the problem.
So what would have happened if you were just telling people what to do but weren't listening? Like what would be the result?
Well, then it'd be something that you want to do, you're going to be doing, that it's not going to be nice, that's all, you know. And I don't think I've ever acted that way. You know, I couldn't act that way because my feeling is that you show the person you're dealing with the respect, you're going to get it back. You're going to get that respect back. And that's what happened to me, in my career. Central High School was a good school, inner city school, and you come in the building was operating, the kids were all in classes and we operated as a college campus. Every 50 minutes, the youngsters used to leave the main building, go across the street, the main highway, go to the vocational school or the girls' gym, the boys' gym, or the cafeteria. So in other words, there was a mixture of students all the time. And there wasn't a day that I woke up in the morning and got ready to go and say, oh boy, I got to go to that place again. Never happened.
Wow.
Yep.
Now that's amazing. And going back in time to when you left the Army, why did you choose to go to Providence College?
Well, you know, that's a good question. I didn't know what I wanted to do. And, but walking through PC, and I used to go up there and watch the games too. When they had that time had the baseball and didn't have football. But I don't know, I just got interested in PC, so I went in and talked to somebody, and then I signed up for PC. My first thing I had to do was, I didn't graduate from college, from high school, because I was getting inducted in my senior year. And so that meant I had to take care of that when I got out. But Central, they had a special program down at Central High School for veterans. And I took some courses through the Armed Forces Institute while I was in the service. So I got some credits there. And then I went to Central because I wanted a regular diploma. And then I got that. And that's when I went in PC. And I was thinking of URI too. But because PC was so close that I knew all about it, you know, I mean, and I liked what was going on there. And but I didn't know what I wanted to do until Larry Drew one day said to me, and he was a basketball coach, and he says, Joe, he said, how would you like to coach a little? Coach, I said, what are you talking about? He says, Nathaniel Green, you know, see, at that time the junior high schools had leagues for the junior high school kids. They had soccer, baseball, you know, basketball and whatnot. And he says, we're looking for someone to coach basketball for the kids down at Green. So I said, oh, that sounds good. Sounds interesting. So I went down and started and coached them at the team at Green, and that got me interested, you know. So then I signed up with, and I enjoyed Providence. The only thing with that, you know, and I don't say that in a negative way, but here we are. Now we had a lot of veterans at PC at that time, and we had to wear the beanies, you know, for 2 weeks. We had to go to college with a tie. And if you didn't have a tie, you had to go down and see Father Dillon, and he'd rent a tie to you for 10 cents. See? And if you ran out of ties, then he had to pay big scissors there with all the newspapers. He'd cut out a tie, and he pinned it on you and I used the paper tie to go to school.
You'd have a newspaper tie.
Newspaper tie. And you know, you think, well, but you think that would happen today?
No, but it would be pretty funny if it did. And the beanie was what, first 2 weeks of freshman year?
First 2 weeks of freshman year. And even then, as a freshman, you couldn't play varsity basketball or baseball or anything else. You had to be a freshman for the year. And so we had a lot of fun with that. One of the priests there was the athletic director, and he used to drive us around in a van. And so we had a lot of good times. But I think that was a good thing with taking a freshman year and getting the youngsters into the college, preparation and whatnot, and it was really helpful.
Yeah, getting acclimated, especially for you, coming from your experience. It's not as if you just came from Mount Pleasant High School and then into college. You had that obviously that time in the Army, which would have changed it. So for you, what was PC like back then? I mean, you live in the neighborhood. You've seen all of the changes that's happened to PC from a physical standpoint. How would you describe just the student body and how it worked back then in context of what it is now?
Well, it's a change from A to Z. But everything changes, and I don't favor changing just for the sake of changing. I believe in changing for a purpose, And I think Providence College did that. And remember, that was most of the youngsters, most of us that were at PC were local. They had very few that was on campus. It was a transit school. And so there was more, you had more activities, to try to keep the students together. And but today, there's much more offered to students than ever back then, which is good.
Right. So then you got into the coaching with the middle school kids and got into, all right, maybe this is working at school. This is a potential career option. And then when you got out, that's when you started substitute teaching?
Yeah. Yep. I started subbing. And at that time, the teacher salary was really low. And so I was doing something else and doing training, doing long-term subbing and whatnot. So when I went in, I got credit for 7 years of the time I was doing it. They added to my 35 years. So it worked out for us.
Right. And then you mentioned before how you played basketball and baseball at Providence College. And then you mentioned, you kind of got into coaching. And anyone who's listening to this podcast knows who the current men's basketball coach is at PC, Ed Cooley. And you actually have a little backstory with him.
Well, Ed was one of my former students and even one of my neighbors when he was coaching at Boston College. And Ed was always in school, always smiling. He was a good student. He was an excellent basketball player, naturally. He was all-state. And but you can always get a smile out of him, and a good example for the younger kids.
Now, for you, looking back then, were there certain characteristics that you saw in some of your students, and maybe Ed is an example of this, where you could look at them and say, all right, this person I think is going to be, very successful in life? Were you able to make those sorts of predictions, and what characteristics, if you could, would play into that, or was it pretty random at that age?
You couldn't always distinguish what's going to happen. You can with someone like Ed Cooley or Mike Stevens of that nature. And we had a lot of those students there. And we also had a lot of students, no leadership at home, and in the later years that we had to make a study on how many youngsters were not living at home, living in cars and whatnot. And that was sad. So you don't want to label students. You try to steer each one to doing what's good for them. But sometimes it just doesn't work out.
Right. You mentioned Mike Stevens. For those who don't know, Mike Stevens is one of the best college basketball referees in the country, also a Providence native, who, if you watched the PC UConn exhibition, actually was there for that game. And so, as you just mentioned, there's kind of a wide variety of people attended Central High School while you were there and still do. So what were some of the characteristics of the kids who really achieved great things in life? What would you say, all right, these are the characteristics that were needed for those kids to really, blossom and to achieve great things?
Well, they're the ones that were in school every day. They're the ones that listened, and they were the ones that did the work, and they're the ones that were participating in school activities, and you want to see everyone do that, but a lot of them didn't, and you can compare In other words, you can't compare Providence or Central Falls or Woonsocket and whatever to Narragansett or Barrington or whatever, because it's a different, student body, and we try to do our best with all the students, not only just the good ones, the ones who are in school every day, and we had a program there with talking about school within the school. We got a grant, a 3-year grant for a school within our school. And we got 120 students, just picked them out, not looking at Chris or Matt, just having the council pick out 125 youngsters. They had one section of the building, and we had their own laboratory, science laboratory, their own English, math, history, and science teachers. And the only time they left that area was they'd go to the cafeteria for lunch or the gym. And we had hired 3 people from the community, had nothing to do with the school, and then they had no children in the school, but they were community people, and they were given the 9th grade, and they would follow them up, whether it was Sunday, Saturday, at night, or whatever, while they weren't in school. And it worked beautifully. We had about a 94 or 5% attendance of school in that thing because they were getting attention. Today, back then you had about 26 what they called truant officers. Now they're called social workers. And we had social workers that were having a high school and a middle school then. Impossible. Mm-hmm. Impossible.
So what is some of the best advice that you've ever received, that you've taken to heart?
Well, the thing that I received was listen and show respect to the worst student. In other words, don't come down hard on them. Just listen, just understand, just talk to them quietly and try to control them, period, that way. And the word gets around, and that's my feeling, and I was very successful at it, to be honest about it.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Joe. This has been a true pleasure. Thank you for all of your service to Providence, the United States, whether it was in the Army or your time in education. We really appreciate it.
Okay, and thank you very much.